As the bitter Belgian winter descended on December 17, 1944, the most formidable armored weapon of World War II ground to a halt. The colossal 70-ton Tiger II tank, a fearsome embodiment of steel and firepower, fell silent in the pre-dawn gloom. Its commander, the decorated SS Colonel Joachim Peiper, angrily pounded the cold turret as the engine sputtered and died. All around him, stretching for miles into the misty Ardennes forest, his entire battle group, Kampfgruppe Peiper, was paralyzed. 67 tanks, hundreds of armored vehicles, and nearly 5,000 of Germany's elite soldiers were motionless, transformed from a terrifying armored spearhead into a frozen, helpless traffic jam. They were the tip of the spear for Hitler's last great gamble in the West, the Battle of the Bulge. They had been tasked with smashing through American defenses, racing towards the Moose River, and altering the entire trajectory of the war. Yet now, they found themselves stranded, their momentum ground to a halt. What could have possibly halted this formidable force? What weapon had the Americans deployed to so thoroughly neutralize Germany's finest? The answer was both absurdly simple and profoundly unsettling. The fuel gauges all read empty. This was no mere logistical hiccup, but a symptom of a terminal disease infecting the entire German war machine. Peiper knew the plan had been desperate from the outset. His orders were not just to fight, but to hunt. The entire offensive was predicated on a strategy of profound vulnerability. They had to capture American fuel reserves to survive. Germany, the nation that had perfected the lightning-fast blitzkrieg assault, could no longer power its own machines. The plan was to utilize the enemy's own fuel supply, as their troops shivered in their stalled vehicles. Peiper gazed through the mist at the small village of Hansfeld, an abandoned American supply depot. The GIs had fled so hastily that they left behind warm coffee and smoldering fires. Lined up before them were rows upon rows of American jerry cans, thousands of them. It was a miraculous find. A junior officer pried one open and confirmed the contents were high-octane gasoline. The relief was palpable as Peiper's men scrambled to begin refueling their vehicles. Peiper walked through the enormous stockpile, mentally calculating the total, an astounding 50,000 gallons. This was more than enough to fill every tank, half-track, and vehicle in his entire convoy. With this fuel, they could reach the Moose River and perhaps venture even further. In that fateful moment, a glimmer of hope emerged. The offensive was back on, and the war still seemed winnable. But as the elite SS soldiers eagerly poured American fuel into the engines of German panzers, a chilling realization began to dawn on the commander. Why would the Americans simply abandon such a valuable resource, one that could potentially turn the tide of the war? This wasn't a miracle, but rather a harbinger of doom. To fully comprehend the profound shock felt by the German forces, one must understand the dire state of the Third Reich in late 1944. For months, Allied bombers had systematically erased Germany's capacity to produce fuel, leaving the nation running on fumes. The once mighty war machine was grinding to a halt, its mobility and firepower severely compromised. This unexpected windfall of American supplies seemed too good to be true, and the commander couldn't shake the unsettling question. What did this say about the enemy they were facing? As the German soldiers eagerly refueled their tanks, the commander's mind raced, unraveling everything he thought he knew about the war. This wasn't a stroke of luck, but rather a trap, a death sentence disguised as salvation. The war was no longer winnable, and the realization struck him with a crushing weight. The sprawling Loa works, the heart of Germany's synthetic fuel production, had its output drastically reduced by over 95%. The refineries at Pulitz, Blackhammer, and Brooks were virtual ghost towns, operating at less than 10% capacity. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, had presented the Führer with reports showing in stark numerical terms that Germany could no longer wage a mobile war. The Luftwaffe was grounding its most advanced fighters, not due to a lack of pilots, but rather a shortage of aviation fuel. Pilot training had been slashed from hundreds of flight hours to a mere 60. The mighty German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, had become a ghost fleet, with its battleships and cruisers rusting in port, unable to sail. Civilian traffic had been banned on the home front for years. Fuel was a precious commodity, more valuable than gold, and the Gestapo would launch extensive investigations into the black market theft of even a single liter. The nation that had once conquered a continent was reverting to horse-drawn transportation. In stark contrast, the United States in 1944 possessed a thriving oil industry, producing a staggering 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil that year. Germany, including its synthetic plants and captured Romanian fields, managed only 33 million barrels, less than 2% of American output. The East Texas oil field alone outproduced the entire Axis-occupied Europe. This was not merely a gap, but a vast chasm in oil production capabilities. The American logistical forces faced a unique challenge during the war: an abundance of resources rather than scarcity. To address this, they devised innovative solutions to transport the massive quantities of supplies needed at the front. The Red Ball Express, a fleet of nearly 6,000 trucks operating around the clock on dedicated one-way highways across France, delivered over 12,500 tons of supplies daily. This alone consumed more fuel than an entire German army group received in a month. Recognizing the need for even greater capacity, the Allies executed the engineering marvel known as Operation Pluto. They laid flexible pipelines across the English Channel, pumping over 1 million gallons of fuel from Britain to France every day. These remarkable logistical feats enabled the Allies to sustain their forces and advance against the German military. From a sprawling network of pipes spreading inland, a circulatory system pumped the lifeblood of war directly to the front lines. By December 1944, American forces in Europe were consuming 1.2 million gallons of fuel per day, with their logistical network delivering 1.4 million. They were fighting a massive, high-intensity battle, yet still adding 200,000 gallons to their strategic reserves every single day. This was the context that Joachim Peiper was beginning to understand as his men refueled at Huntsfeld. His miraculous find of 50,000 gallons was less than 5% of what the Americans were pumping across the channel daily, a mere rounding error. As his men worked, the evidence of this terrifying reality mounted. One of his sergeants, who could read English, discovered the shipping manifest in the abandoned depot office and brought it to Peiper. The documents meticulously outlined the gasoline's journey, tracing its path from a Texas refinery to a New York port, across the Atlantic to Liverpool, through the Channel to Normandy, and finally trucked 400 miles to a small depot in Belgium. This entire 6,000-mile odyssey had been completed in less than 6 weeks. Peiper read the papers, crumpling them in his fist, and remained silent. According to the sergeant, his face turned pale. Soon after, another soldier discovered a stack of the American military newspaper, Stars and Stripes, dated just 2 days prior on December 15. The headline celebrated the inauguration of a brand new pipeline stretching from Cherbourg to Verdun, capable of delivering 300,000 gallons of fuel per day. This single secondary pipeline was supplying 6 times more fuel daily than the amount Peiper had just captured, which he had believed to be his salvation. The initial euphoria of triumph quickly dissipated, replaced by a chilling sense of dread. They were not battling another army, but rather an entire industrial powerhouse. With his tanks fueled by American gasoline, Peiper's Kampfgruppe roared back to life and surged forward, restoring their momentum as a lethal spearhead. They smashed through the village of Bulge, capturing additional American supplies, food, ammunition, and crucially, maps. However, these maps only deepened their horror, revealing the locations of numerous other American fuel depots scattered throughout the area. Every major crossroads and small town seemed to host its own massive fuel stockpile. The U.S. First Army alone had over 3.5 million gallons stored in reserve depots just behind the front lines. Peiper's forces, growing increasingly desperate and brutal, committed the infamous Malmö massacre, where they mercilessly slaughtered 84 unarmed American prisoners of war. This atrocity was driven by logistical panic, as Peiper later claimed he lacked the fuel to transport the prisoners to the rear. By the evening of December 17, Peiper's advanced guard reached the town of Stivalo, where they laid eyes on the ultimate prize, the largest American fuel depot in the sector, containing over 2 million gallons of gasoline. This fuel could have propelled them not just to the Meuse, but all the way to Antwerp, potentially securing victory in the Battle of the Bulge. However, as the German tanks rumbled towards the depot, they witnessed American soldiers moving among the vast stacks of jerry cans, but they were not preparing a defense. The 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had been tasked with a critical mission: deny the enemy access to the fuel depot at all costs. Under the command of Captain John Brewster, the soldiers worked feverishly, pouring gasoline to create trails between the stacks and distributing white phosphorus grenades. As Peiper's tanks approached the hill overlooking the depot, Captain Brewster gave the order. A sergeant pulled the pin on a grenade and hurled it into the fuel. Instantly, a wall of flames erupted, shooting hundreds of feet into the air. Within minutes, the entire 15-acre depot was engulfed in a raging inferno, a towering pillar of black smoke climbing thousands of feet into the winter sky, visible for 100 miles. The blaze would burn for 3 days, consuming enough fuel to have powered the entire German offensive to Antwerp and back again. The soldiers were not attempting to evacuate the fuel, they were deliberately destroying it, denying its use to the enemy. The American commander, Peipers, stood atop his battle tank, gazing in stunned disbelief at the raging inferno before him. One of his soldiers later recounted Peiper's somber words, as he turned away from the blaze, muttering, "They can afford to burn 2 million gallons just to deny us access. What are we doing here?" That haunting question reverberated across the Ardennes region, where American engineers were carrying out similar acts of destruction. In Spa, they burned 2.5 million gallons of fuel, while at Franche-Comté, another million gallons went up in flames. During the first week of the battle, American forces deliberately destroyed over 8 million gallons of their own precious fuel, determined to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. To the German High Command, this was an unfathomable act of madness. 8 million gallons was more fuel than they had allocated for the entire offensive, an amount of energy that could have tipped the strategic balance of the war. The American military leadership viewed the situation as a prudent tactical decision, leveraging a vast and readily replenishable resource. While Peiper's troops desperately siphoned the last remnants of fuel from disabled vehicles, American C-47 transport aircraft conducted hundreds of sorties to the besieged town of Bastogne, airdropping essential supplies, including 160,000 gallons of gasoline. In a single day, the Americans delivered more fuel to the encircled garrison than Peiper's entire elite armored division possessed in total. This realization rapidly spread from the front lines all the way to the highest echelons of command. After the war, General Hasso von Manteuffel, the commander of the 5th Panzer Army, acknowledged that upon learning the Americans had destroyed 8 million gallons of fuel, he knew the offensive was doomed before it truly began. The physical battle may have still been raging, but the psychological war, the war of industrial capacity, had already been decided. The numbers told a story that no battlefield heroics could overcome. While Germany's war machine was withering from lack of resources, America was awash in oil. This contrast was evident in every piece of equipment. A German Tiger tank guzzled 2.5 gallons per mile in combat, while an American Sherman consumed less than half that. American vehicles were standardized with interchangeable parts, streamlining maintenance. In contrast, the German army was a chaotic collection of captured equipment, from French tanks needing specialized lubricants to Soviet trucks requiring unique spare parts. Each one a logistical nightmare compounding their difficulties. On December 20, Peiper received a radio message that sealed his fate. A fuel convoy had been destroyed by Allied aircraft. Trapped without any chance of resupply, the German officers gathered to face the grim reality. One of them bluntly stated that they had fuel for only about 20 kilometers, while their objective, the Meuse River, lay 30 kilometers away. It was in this desperate, surrounded situation that Peiper spoke the words that encapsulated Germany's defeat. "Gentlemen," he said, "we have discovered that our enemy burns more fuel to deny it to us than we received for this entire operation. What we captured at Hansfeld, which seemed like a miracle, was nothing compared to their resources." 3 days later, on the night of December 23, The weather cleared, and the Allied air forces, which had been grounded by fog, took to the skies. Over 2,000 sorties were flown that day, with a P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bomber consuming 300 gallons of fuel per hour and a B-26 Marauder medium bomber burning 200 gallons. The Allied air campaign proved overwhelming for the Luftwaffe. In a single day, the Allies consumed more aviation fuel than the German Air Force had received for an entire month. Facing this relentless aerial onslaught, Peiper's position became completely untenable. That night, he issued his final order. His men, the elite Waffen-SS troops, were to abandon their vehicles. They proceeded to destroy their own invaluable machines, placing explosive charges inside 39 Tiger and Panther tanks, 70 armored half-tracks, and over 100 other vehicles. Draining the last of the fuel, they ensured the demolitions were complete, not to fight, but to prevent the Allies from capturing this prized military hardware. Under the cover of darkness, Joachim Peiper and the 770 survivors of his original 5,000-strong force slipped away on foot, retreating like ghosts through the snow-covered forest. They left behind millions of Reichsmarks worth of Germany's finest military equipment. The Kampfgruppe Peiper's encounter with a fuel shortage exemplified the harsh realities of industrial warfare in World War II. Despite the German military's tactical prowess and technological advantages, the war's outcome ultimately hinged on the production capacity of distant factories and refineries, rather than the valor of individual soldiers or generals. The romantic notion of the superior German warrior succumbed to the brutal mathematical calculus of modern conflict, where material resources proved more decisive than fighting spirit or battlefield genius. Even the vaunted Tiger tank could not overcome the fundamental imbalance in industrial might between the Axis and Allied powers. The story underscores how the nature of warfare had evolved, shifting away from the traditional heroics of the past towards a new paradigm defined by the relentless demands of mechanized, resource-intensive combat. In 1944, the Allies enjoyed a staggering production advantage over the Axis powers, with a ratio of more than 5-to-1 in nearly every category of military equipment. However, the disparity was even more pronounced when it came to the lifeblood of modern warfare, petroleum. The Allies' advantage in this critical resource was a staggering 50-to-1. Germany, a global superpower, found itself fighting a war with the logistical capacity of a small developing nation. When American salvage crews eventually reached Peiper's abandoned vehicle park at Le Glaise, they discovered dozens of perfectly operational tanks. The official report noted that to get all 39 tanks running again would require approximately 8,000 gallons of fuel. Remarkably, this fuel was readily available from local reserves, and the entire process could be completed in just 4 hours. What had been a precious, division-saving treasure for the Germans was a trivial logistical task for the Americans, who could source the necessary fuel locally and have the vehicles operational in a single afternoon. The discovery at Hansfeld revealed a stark contrast, not merely in fuel reserves, but in the very paradigm of the American forces. Their profligacy exceeded Germany's total requirements. Today, a lone King Tiger, abandoned by Peiper, remains on display in Yaz's museum, a silent steel testament to a core principle of contemporary warfare. Valor alone cannot overcome the primacy of logistics.